Thank you.
Yeah, hello everybody to this session on the basics of generative AI. Fabian and I, we will present some general aspects about generative AI. What are the fields of application? What are things to watch out for? And then on the second, can we get one step? Okay. So that is the first part. And then the second part, we're going to talk about prompting techniques for these models. So I guess you are all familiar with the likes of ChatGPT, for example. And by now there have been some well-documented ways to get the best results out of these models. And we just want to use the second part of the presentation to address these specific techniques. And then we'd dedicate a third part of the presentation to answering your questions you might have and things like, and discussing further together with you. So before we start, we'd like to get your feedback. Maybe you can write it into the chat, or use the Slido link Fabian is going to share.
I'm going to share with you a link where you will then see the question, which I'm also going to
that's even better
to share here on the screen.
So for us, it would be interesting which tools you've been using so far. Let's give it a bit more time. So it seems to crystallize that most people have been using ChatGPT in the past. Some people have been using other chat clients like Bard, Bing AI, Perplexity. And then, only 20%, 25% have been using these image generation tools. That is interesting. And chatting with documents is not that common among people here in the audience. Okay. Then the second poll, how often do you use it? Okay, seems like it's the majority is using it a couple of times per week, and some people are even using it daily. And then some people who were curious, I guess, and tried it out, but the majority is using it daily or at least a couple of times a week, which is interesting. So we have sort of proficient users or professional users here, which is good for us too.
Yeah, it's interesting to see this audience. You are already very familiar. We ran this questionnaire also to the management, for example, and then we got some very different answers. So cool to see we have here many early adopters.
Okay.
Some people pay for the commercial version of ChatGPT.
Yes, I mean, that is very worthwhile sometimes, depending on what you're doing, because you get access to GPT-4, which you don't have otherwise. But maybe let's start at the beginning. So, you all know ChatGPT, but what is ChatGPT actually? So ChatGPT is a so-called large language model, which was developed by OpenAI. And large language models are not only ChatGPT, but all these other latest and greatest chatbots you might be familiar with, like Bard or Perplexity and so on. They're all using these large language models, and they are based on a technology called deep learning, which is using artificial neural networks to store data. And basically, they were all trained to predict the next word in a sentence. And by doing that, they iteratively got better at understanding the context of our world, I would call it, because in order to predict the next word with a certain precision, you have to have an understanding of basic concepts quite well, because otherwise the prediction or the next word is going to be wrong. So these models, how did they do it? They trained these models on about 70% of publicly available data on the internet. And I think this figure is still GPT 3.5, so ChatGPT, but with GPT-4, I think it's even more than that, because now they are at the moment kind of scraping the bottle when it comes to publicly available data. And they are trying to find new ways to get data from, for example, proprietary sources or from YouTube videos. But these existing models, they have been trained on internet data and a limited amount of proprietary data. But of course, they are not completely open about what they have been trained exactly on. And in the next step, after this initial training on the data was finished, these models are usually fine-tuned using a process called reinforcement by human feedback, or short is what is it? Reinforcement RLHF. So you basically get your untuned model, which is just giving out the next token or the next word in a sentence. But what you actually want is you want this question answer behavior with the user, and it should always give you a couple of sentences and not only one sentence, but instead it should give you, I don't know, one page or one screen of answer, and not much more, not much less. And that is basically what this fine-tuning is aimed at. So the model gives output as some user in a chat context would also do, and it is way more natural in the way it responds to the user. And what is the big thing now about these new chatbots? So if you are familiar with these old chatbots, which you might have seen on your insurance website, or I don't know, any bigger company, they usually have these chatbots on their website. And I don't know if you tried them out, you probably noticed that they are not very useful in many ways, especially if you have a question which is not one of the standard cases. So if you, I don't know, want to complain, for example, about something, you will automatically be routed to one of the agents because the chatbot can't handle it. And that is what these chatbots now makes them stand out, because they basically don't have to be programmed individually with certain rules. So given this prompt by the user, this output is going to be presented, but instead, due to the massive corpus they learned on, they, as I said, have a general understanding of the concepts, and they can make relations between different concepts, and they can answer to the user in way more realistic fashion as a human being would be. And if you do additional fine-tuning on, for example, your company's or your organization's data, and maybe even have additional documents it can reference for answering questions to the user, then it can be on a level which might compete with some human agents which are answering these questions in the old world, I'd say. Yeah, that is just a general breakdown of what these LLMs are. So what are the general capabilities? How could you break them down? I don't think this is a completely comprehensive list, but we just wanted to mention some things these chatbots are really good at. So for example, expansion and summarization of content. So I often take a lengthy article from some news website, for example, or a long document I get at work, put it into the GPT model and ask it to summarize in 5 bullet points. And of course, the same you can do if you just give it 5 bullet points. You can ask it to extend it into a well-written long form article or text. And I think this this comic here on the right hand side is quite nice, because it's on the left hand side, it's someone telling their colleague, okay, this AI turns my single bullet point into a long email I can pretend I wrote. And on the other side, the receiver says, I get this email and now I can have it summarized in 5 bullet points. So why didn't they just send the bullet points in the first hand? But yeah, that is like how humans work, I guess, in many cases. Okay. Then you can use it for transformation, like translation to other languages. You can, of course, generate code, which is, for me personally, is a big thing, especially with GPT-4. I use it every day, all day, for writing code and analyzing code. You can, of course, change the formatting. Oops. Yeah, and you can, I mean, you probably have all seen these write me a poem in the Amazon Code Whisperer, Anas Khalil. Yeah, that is like competitor of GPT, I think. That is, I haven't tried it out myself, but it is probably also very good, I heard. Yeah, and you can say, okay, write me a poem in the style of Shakespeare, and then it will write down some paragraphs as Shakespeare would have done, or what he has run. Yeah, so yeah, that is also something transforming.
There's a question in the chat from Valerie. She would like to know what exactly is a concept and a token.
Okay. So a concept is something we, I guess, came up with. It's not really defined necessarily in the research, but I would say, like, these AI models, it's the first time a computer really gets a human concept, like, for example, what is a cat? What comprises a cat? So it is furry, it has teeth, it has whiskers, and so on. So it has all these things related to a cat, and it can put this into relation, for example. So a cat is a pet, and what are other pets? So these concepts, which are somehow very abstract to us, it understands this abstraction level, and it can say, okay, instead of a dog, for example, I could put I could put a cat into the same sentence and it still makes sense. And in order to do that, you have to have all these different ideas about the concepts we deal with in our daily life. Yeah, because otherwise, if you want to complete a sentence which starts with my favorite pets are, and then it has to predict the next word, and it says elephant, then in many cases it will be wrong, because in many cases people will say my favorite pets are cats, or my favorite pets are dogs. Yeah, so you have to have a grasp of these concepts, especially when it comes to more difficult prediction tasks, to really come up with good predictions for the completion of a text. And then to the second question, what is a token? So a token is basically the internal representation of texts these large language models are using. They are not using single characters in a word or whole words, but they're using, I think, 10,000s of different 3-character, 4-character combinations they put together in order to get to the words. So for example, summarize could be, if I look at summarization, it could be one token is sum, then one token is mar, one token is iz, and one token is ion. And that is how the model understands the code, and that or not the code, the text. And that is also why you will see ChatGPT fail a lot when you ask it to, for example, adhere to a certain character limit or tell you how many characters in a certain word, because it doesn't understand text in the way we do by looking at similar at individual characters, but instead it is looking at these tokens, and it does not necessarily know how many tokens are in, how many characters are in that one token, because the lowest abstraction it has for text are these tokens, and it doesn't have any information about what they comprise, right? So it has to have learned at some point that summarization has, I don't know, 16 characters or what it is, 12. But if it hasn't learned that, it cannot tell you by just counting, right? So that is maybe why this token concept is quite important to know about, because you can answer for yourself why GPT might fail in some cases. Yeah, I hope that was kind of clear.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next one. So chatting you're all aware of. I mean,
sorry, I didn't quite understand it. The characterization, number of characters. Why ChatGPT usually fail? Because I noticed that, but maybe I should search more about it.
Yeah. So, say we have the word expansion here in the first line, right? And ChatGPT, it doesn't have actually text stored anywhere in the system. It just has these inputs and outputs, and all it says is, okay, I have here expansion is made of these input tokens, which is exp, ans, and ion, for example. And then it goes through the transformer, to the architecture of the model, and then in the end, it is going to tell what the output is, which is the next token, which could be expansion and, for example. And could be easily one token in that case, because it is something which often stands on its own. But if you have exp and ans and ion as your basic elements of your language, I mean, just think about it. If, for example, we as humans wouldn't look at E, but always only at exp, then we would maybe know, okay, this word is made up of 3 tokens, because we have token 1 exp, token 2 ans, and token 3 ion, and we then can count its 3 tokens, but we don't necessarily know that E is a character, because in our world, there is no such thing as a character, right? Does it make sense? Because it doesn't think of words as characters, it thinks of words innately, it thinks of words as tokens, and only, I mean, it knows that characters exist, but it doesn't make the conclusion back that these tokens are somehow characters. It's a bit tricky, but I mean, you can probably ask ChatGPT to explain it better than I did.
Yeah, I'll actually, I never thought of asking why this is failing. This is a interesting thing to look at. I have to be frank, I haven't studied much the deep learning, so maybe if I learned more, it would be.
Yeah, it's just an engineering thing. I think they had to do this in order to make it scalable, and it's not necessarily only deep learning. It's not because it's deep learning, it's just because the first person who created these GPT models came up with this tokenization and found out that it's working quite well. Yeah. Okay. Then you can you can basically use ChatGPT for inference. So what would you call it as a human? It would be like reasoning tasks, like what is the sentiment of a text, for example? So is it positive, negative? Assign documents to categories. That is something we have done within the company. Ratings on a scale, for example, translate how well a text is written into a scale of 1 to 10 or something like that, which kind of needs, we would say, reasoning probably, but of course in the end it's all statistics, and it's looking for certain things which are characteristic of a good text, and then it is translating that into a score, if you will. Okay, creativity. Yeah, that is what I already mentioned with the poem. It's quite good, especially GPT-4 is very good with rhyming, even rhyming poems. And information extraction is yeah, you can give it some text and then you can only retrieve some elements of it. Or yeah, if you have a, I don't know, a log file from a computer, for example, you can ask it, just give me the parts which are important to me or whatever. Yeah. Okay, next slide. So just maybe as an overview, because you're all already pretty familiar with ChatGPT, but of course there's other services. While ChatGPT, at least in the basic version, is restricted to a cutoff date of, I think, end of 2021. With other services, for example, Bing, you can also extend the knowledge by having the model do web queries. So it searches on the internet and then gives you back the results it finds, and yeah, of course, tries to answer the question you had. In my experience, that works semi good. So I'm not the biggest fan of Bing, but maybe you are would be interested to know if that is the case. Then Google Bard, I think it is spelled with T actually. I'm not sure. It's pretty similar to ChatGPT. I think the best or the most interesting thing is that it's integrated with the Google product suite now since I think like 1 or 2 months now. And you can basically tell it, okay, answer to that email in my inbox and have me, see what you would answer, or you create this Sheets formula for me, and so on and so on. So it is apparently integrated with the Google product suite. And then the next one is my personal favorite, Perplexity. It's very similar to Microsoft Bing because it's also in the background searching the internet. Okay. It's searching the internet, and there is a free version which is using GPT 3.5, which is wrong in some cases. And then there's a paid service which is using GPT-4. And in my experience, I am even paying for the paid service. It is super good because you have this, and I'm not getting paid by Perplexity, just as a disclaimer, because you have this so-called co-pilot mode, and then I think it's creating like 8 different queries to a web search, and then it's going through the different websites it found, and then it's combining everything and using GPT-4 to come up with an answer. And I'm very often astonished what it finds out and what it scrapes from somewhere I wouldn't have found myself, I guess. And that's pretty cool. Then you have Claude AI, which is what are they called? Not Inflection. Anthropic. Anthropic. It's a spin-off by one of the original developers of the first 2 GPT models. And he, with some colleagues, he created this new Anthropic company, and they are very competitive when it comes to chat agents. I would even say they are better than the Google Bard model right now. So especially Claude 2 is very nice. It is not as strong in the reasoning part. So if, for example, coding, I think doesn't work as well. But when it comes to creative writing and so on, it's very good. Yeah. Then all these co-pilots for coding. I mean, you already whispered, you already mentioned what is it called? Amazon Code Whisperer. And I think there's one additional one, so there are like 3 big ones. So one is GitHub Copilot, one is Code Whisperer, and then one I just can't think of, which are very good at code generation. And they are even integrated in your coding environment. So you will start typing something. And I mean, you all know, if you code yourself, you all know these autocomplete modules, but it's autocomplete on steroids, I'd call it. It's like giving you the next paragraph of code or whatever. It's not always perfect, but they are getting better and better, especially with the underlying models they are using. So I think GitHub Copilot is based on GPT 3.5, and Copilot X is probably based on GPT-4 for all I know. Yeah, and then there are some others like ChatSonic and Jasper AI. I think Jasper is especially for creative writing, but I have not that much experience with it myself. Yeah. Any input on that? Someone said Microsoft Copilot will be released on November 1st. Are you referring to the good for privacy? You mean of these code things or of all of them?
Well, of these options that you're listing here, like which one would you recommend to, potentially not share any of the details that you're asking?
I think it depends on how secret the information is you share. So in ChatGPT, we at least have the promise, and I think it also says in their T's and C's that they delete the data after 30 days. If you have this opt-out, you can basically say, okay, I want the chat to be in my history, or I don't want the chat in my history. And when you say, I don't want it in my history, they promise or they guarantee that it's not going to be trained on and it's not going to be stored for more than 30 days because for compliance reasons, if someone does something illegal. Okay, and for the other ones, I cannot really answer that question. I don't think there's necessarily any statement which is. So I would just, to be frank, I would expect that most of them are using your information you input. So if you are really looking at handling very sensitive information, I would probably look at some open source models instead, which is of course a bit more difficult for the normal user to set up. But if it's really necessary that you use an LLM with very sensitive data, then I wouldn't trust any of these services, actually. What do you say, Fabian?
I also agree with that, and it's also our corporate policy. So for all employees with DHL, it is, for example, recommended that we are not allowed to use the versions you can access on the web. However, there is also an offer by Microsoft with OpenAI. If you use it on they call it private cloud, you need to pay for it, but there in this environment, you get some additional guarantees that they don't use your entered data for training their model, and they do not store it longer than this period. So the more privacy you want to get, of course, the more complex it becomes or the more expensive it becomes. But like Joerg was saying, with this deactivating the chat in ChatGPT, you are doing already a good first step.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you have the T's and C's of the companies, but then still in many cases, you're sending stuff to the US, for example, if you're based in Europe as we are. And there's just, I mean, we all know since Edward Snowden that these agencies are sniffing all the web traffic anyway. So even if the companies are not using your stuff, you still, if it's super secretive, you still don't want to send it to some US company or some foreign company, probably. Okay. Some words on the evolution. So how is generative AI compared to all these other AI terms we've seen in the past? So in the beginning, I would say like in the 90s or even early 2000s, you had these decision tree based models or linear regression and so on, and it was basically all academia where they were used, so very niche. And I think this era was also called the AI winter because nothing much was going on. Also because just there wasn't enough data really to feed these models or train these models on, and the PCs and computers were too slow. Then in the 2010s, it started with the term big data, I would say, that suddenly people became aware, oh, we've got these vast databases of data, and we've got some new methods, like, for example, boosted regression trees and yeah, some libraries which make it really easy to deal with this data. And then, yeah, we got more and more complex models, but they were still pretty yeah, old school in terms we still, for example, in computer vision, we still use these support vector machines instead of deep learning for identifying faces, which worked very poorly. And we still use, I mean, we still use today regression trees, for example, but back then it was the absolute go-to for everything tabular data. You would also always do regression, or you would do a tree-based model, I would say, in many cases. And because, yeah, artificial neural networks existed, but they were very hard to train. They were very easily misled by outliers in your data. So yeah, there wasn't really much use for these models except for some certain cases. And then I think it was 2011 or 2012 when this AlexNet competition was held, which was held in the past before that. But the thing about it was that Jeffrey Hinton and Ilya Sutskever, so Jeffrey Hinton, I think, is from the University of Toronto or Montreal, so Canadian University, and Jeffrey Hinton was one of his students. And they had the idea of training a deep neural network, and it hadn't been possible to train that before because it was just too computationally expensive. And what they did is they wrote a kernel or a way to use graphics cards, so GPUs, for running the model or training the model on the GPU, and that accelerated the deep learning training by a couple of orders of magnitude. And that way they went to this championship, no, what is it? It's competition, which is about recognizing classes or recognizing objects in photos. And there are, like, I think thousands or millions of photos they have to recognize the objects on. And they just with using this deep learning technique suddenly jumped by 20 percentage points from, I think, 40 something to 60 something. But then later on, by improving on this technique, I think the score now is at 99% or 98%, so even better than any human would be able to spot these objects in this data set. And that was when this deep learning hype started, and deep learning was basically tried out with a lot of different stuff. But in the beginning, so after 2012, and I'd say until 2017, 2018, it was very good, but only most of the time in video and maybe audio fields. So you had these audio detection and audio parsing and video detection and image processing, but it didn't really translate to text. And that is when in 2017 the Transformer paper came in. So the paper was called Attention is All You Need. And I think Ilya Sutskever was also one of the co-authors, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure. And that came up with a mechanic where you could basically look at the context of information in time. Because before, it was really a big problem to, for example, feed a text into such a deep learning model and have the model pay attention to different parts of the text. So if you have if you put in, for example, a sentence, oops, now the presentation is gone. if you put in a sentence into the model, it wouldn't remember what came before the last token used, or the last word you fed into the model. And that is why it worked with image, because you see the whole image at a time. But with texts, it was very difficult. And they came up with this transformer architecture where you basically assign different attention to different parts of the text, and you see, and you basically count the words in the text or the tokens in the text, and then it can assign attention be among these tokens. And that was a way to parallelize and make it way more efficient to look at text using these models. And that is what, based on these transformer models, the first GPT model was created, the second GPT model was created, and so on and so on. And the same also was then applied to audio and yeah, you name it, basically everything which is a time-based kind of data. Yeah. Okay. And that is where we are at now. Yeah. So next slide, maybe. So what are some general concerns when you're dealing with generative AI? Of course, you have the data protection area, which we just talked about. Also, not only what am I inputting, but what are these models using, or what are these models being trained on? So is it scraping all the information from my corporate or organizational website and then yeah, using intellectual property maybe? Then there are still open questions regarding the legal aspects. So can I copyright stuff which was generated by AI? I think there have been some American or US law cases now, and some of them said, no, you cannot. But if you, I don't know, change add a one character to the end, then suddenly you can copyright it. So it's still, I think, disputed. Yeah, and also, can you maybe yourself be liable if you use output from GPT which was taken from intellectual property? That is still also not 100% clear. Then, of course, accuracy is still an issue. It could be biased, of course, because it was fed on public data. So if you have read Reddit or any social media, you know how much bias there is. And you have this whole issue of hallucinations, which they are trying to address, but which still pops up from time to time, especially in the older models. I think with ChatGPT 3.5, it's still pretty prevalent, but GPT-4 already has quite improved on that area. Then you don't have up-to-date info, can be circumvented a little bit with the web querying, but yeah, that is not a real solution in the long run. So I hope at least that they're gonna come up with some way to constantly keep the data up to track, basically. And then, yeah, of course, the transparency is an issue because you don't know what is going on in the model. Also a big problem for alignment of these models. Yeah, because yeah, you don't know what they have in mind or why they are outputting something. Yeah. Yeah, number of prompts in GPT-4 is an issue if you have that plus subscription with GPT-4. But I mean, if you're using the GPT-4 API, it is not so much, it's more an issue of how much can you afford. But I think they're not limiting you, at least not in a very bad way. So then last slide, I think, from my part, what other areas are there?
There's
yeah,
just
maybe.
a raised hand.
Yeah, sorry.
Maybe this waiting to before.
We can't
We cannot hear you.
Anas, do you have a question? You can unmute.
Yeah, sorry. I unmuted, but I think there was a problem. Okay. I mean, about the legal aspect, doesn't ChatGPT itself utilizing, or any generative AI is utilizing large language model, which is basically data available in the internet. So when it generates text, it generates based on text that is already written, which is in theory plagiarized text. Like, like I mean, there was a lot of articles that saying that they are facing some legal cases against them for plagiarism.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the question is just, can you be held responsible if you use it because you got it from ChatGPT, or is ChatGPT or OpenAI liable? I mean, they are probably liable if they breached anything, but are you liable if you take that output and use it, even though you are not aware that it was even copyright protected, for example?
But I think now lawyers are pretty confident in this is not method copyright. I think it is Microsoft who is now giving some guarantees of what is the output of it. You're free to use it, and Microsoft would cover for anything that would come from copyright. I will check for a link, and I can paste it in the chat.
Yeah, I think
I
read
pretty surprising to me.
Yeah, they say, okay, if you get a lawsuit, if you get sued, we're gonna pay your we're gonna pay your expenses. Yeah, but let's see. Yeah, so as I already mentioned, last slide from my side, image generation is a big thing. So you're probably all aware, at least, of stuff like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, these DALL-E models. Just the other day, DALL-E 3 was released, and they are getting better and better at imitating art and coming up with images. And I think this, especially this area, is even a bigger problem, or is even more affected by this whole copyright issue, because of course, if you are a creative, working in the creative field, and suddenly people can just imitate your art style, it's a real problem for you, right? And I think there are a lot of lawsuits right now going on. And then the other field I know about is speech synthesis, which means you can basically copy any speaker. So if you have the voice of Donald Trump, or I don't know whom, you can train a model, and you can pay one of these services, and they train a model, and you can have Donald Trump say whatever you want, or I don't know, whatever other person, or your own voice, I guess you can also clone. And it's pretty impressive already, and I think they're still improving there in that regard. And down here some examples of 11 Labs, I think, is like the current state of the art model, but Resemble and so on, they're also pretty good. Yeah, Donald Trump's voice is the default voice everybody starts with. I hope that's not true. Yeah. Okay.
There's a question in the chat from Aman. He asks, can you elaborate what do you mean by reasoning in AI?
By reasoning, I mean anything, for example, where you have the GPT model calculate a math question. I mean, that we would characterize that as reasoning within humans, at least if it's not like 5 + 5, but because that is probably something you just know. But if it's something more difficult, like 200, the square root of 258,295, you implicitly, I mean, I couldn't do it, but if you were able to do it, you would probably break down the problem into several steps within your head and then go through these steps. And the idea is that the model kind of does something, or has to do something similar when it solves these math questions or whatever question you have, where it's not just memorizing something and giving it out, but instead following a certain procedure, but not just taking the answer from memory and just putting it out. So these LLMs can output or create answers to questions they haven't seen before, and that is reasoning. And I mean, that is what I would refer to as reasoning. Yeah.
Thanks. Jin would also like to know, do libraries such as scikit-learn, TensorFlow, or PyTorch store the data that we use for the model that we develop?
No, I don't think they do. Because, I mean, you're not using PyTorch or scikit, you're not actually sending it to any external party. You're just importing, you're basically downloading the library to your PC, you're importing it into your script, and then all the code resides on your machine. It doesn't send anything back to the library's creators or anything. Or am I wrong, Fabian? I don't think that's the case.
I think especially for these well-known libraries, it is not the case that it is sent, but it is not in general. If you import packages, it is impossible that there is some data sent to the provider. So still for unknown packages, you need to be careful. But like for this established open source packages, I think it is fine to trust that there is no leakage of any personal information.
Yeah, especially PyTorch or scikit-learn or also TensorFlow. I think you don't have to be concerned. Yeah. Fabian?
Right. Then,
sorry, it's not a lot of time left, but
I will continue with giving you just a few tips and tricks on how using ChatGPT and other LLMs more efficiently. And since most of you have used ChatGPT already, I will keep the first part short and deep dive only into 2-3 further ones. But first, it is important that you know how you ask ChatGPT makes a difference in what answer you get. So the wording that you ask it, for example, actions words, what it should do, what you want to get out of it, matters how you can get the result and whether the result is what you want to get out of it. When you use ChatGPT, it is a bit hidden that there is this edit button, which is super helpful when you write a prompt and then you realize, okay, the answer is not exactly what I want to get. I want to refine it. You can click this edit button, and then you can change what you have typed before. You don't need to do copy paste. This can be very helpful in finding the best prompt to get an answer to it. Also, you can ask ChatGPT to have different formats of the output. And this is just a simple example that you can ask it to get the answer as a table. I did it once. I asked ChatGPT to ask for destinations for my next holidays. And instead of having a long text it is generating, it can just give you a table with different attributes you want to ask it for. Then there are some particularities it's helpful to know about. One is that you can do role prompting. That means instead of directly asking the question, you can tell ChatGPT in what role it should behave. And this is just a mathematics question. It is better if you tell it you're a brilliant mathematician, and then it is doing it right. Also, depending on what you want to make use the answer of ChatGPT, you can tell it you're an author, maybe you are talking to a kid. So giving it a context always helps to have a proper style how the model is answering, and in this case, even giving you a correct instead of a wrong answer. Similarly, it is an approach which is called chain of thought. If you would ask directly ChatGPT, yes or no, would the pear sink in water? It would give you a wrong answer. It would directly say no. But if you add to the question things step by step, it is triggered to elaborate on the thinking. It is going step by step through different aspects which affects the question. So it is thinking about the density, about Archimedes' principle, and so on. And in the end, it comes to the correct answer. So whenever you have something about reasoning, Joerg explained before reasoning, it helps to tell it things step by step. And finally, there is an approach called zero-shot prompting and few-shot prompting, meaning you can ask it to give it a certain behavior without telling it what it means. So in the past, you would need to have some services to give you a sentiment analysis. For example, there is a Google API you have to pay for to give you a sentiment analysis of ratings on the web. Instead, you can directly use ChatGPT saying, is the following text positive or negative? And it is just making use of all the knowledge it has been trained on before. Like Joerg said, it is trained on 70% of the internet. This is already sufficient to make such a judgment about the sentiment. And if you have something more particular, you can give it a few examples. So you have the pre-existing knowledge and you give it a few examples, and then it is already well aware of what kind of output you want to have. And in this
Fabian?
I think he got disconnected or something.
Yeah, the AI disconnected him. It's revealing all its secrets. Let's wait 1 minute or half a minute.
so it is.
I think he's coming back.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was automatically muted. I hope you can...
You got disconnected, so we don't see the screen and we missed some of your words.
Okay, I'm sorry for that.
No problem.
I will just finalize with a last tip how to use ChatGPT. It is that instead of directly saying in a sentence, okay, this is what I want to get out of it, you can give it a structured prompt. That means you can think about a task. Maybe you also want to specify the way you want to get an answer. You can specify who is the audience, maybe the complexity. So if you think about a structure that you want to give to the machine, it helps you to directly get a better answer. Instead of making this refinement, you first ask for a task and then you see, okay, no, it's too long. I want to have it in bullet points. Think about what is the structure and give it directly to the machine can be helpful to get a specific answer by the model. With that, I would jump to the end to leave just a few minutes for questions. What we presented to you is broad overview about generative AI, what large language models are, and also what are the capabilities of ChatGPT. Before now, I shared with you some tips and tricks on prompting, meaning using most efficiently these tools. And if you want to learn more about this prompting, for example, you can search in the web. There are a lot of resources where you can get further inspiration how to use these tools.
Thank you so much, Fabian and Joerg. There are some questions in the chat. Valerie, we would like to know, how does ChatGPT recognize the one-word command if it does not understand what a word is?
Indeed, as of my understanding, it has just a rough knowledge. So if you ask, write 50 words, it is giving you an answer. It's not exactly 50 words. Maybe it's 45 or it's 60, but it is I think it is well aware of it cannot count, but still it looks at the tokens and can count. Or maybe Joerg, you have an additional explanation.
No, I think that is right. So it probably has seen text in its training, and someone saying, okay, this text was 50 characters, and then it can somehow estimate how its tokens relate to the number of words, but it is not 100%. And it will also, with this prompt Fabian told you about, this give it back in one word, it will sometimes give you 2 words, give you 3 words. It is not 100% because it's stubborn, I guess.
Thanks. Yeah. Malik, you have a question? Nicole, sorry. Nicole, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Fabian. So my question is, do you think it's good to rely on ChatGPT, for example, if you want to draw, for example, let's say if I want to draw a full data sets of about a solar or about any energy for a specific country. So do you think it's much more reliable to rely on a ChatGPT and then or somehow or making any research or at least take some data from what a ChatGPT recommends us? And also my second question is, can we withdraw what you call an analysis as well, depending on ChatGPT? So maybe these 2 questions can be a bit related.
My impression on getting data, getting some details out of ChatGPT, I wouldn't trust it fully. At least I would double check it. So if you want to get, if I got it right, an assessment of potential for solar energy in different regions, if it's more general, I think it is well capable of it. But if you want to get numbers, if you want to get some particular details, I wouldn't trust it too much. So it is rather good in giving you concepts, giving you ideas, than having the full, let's say, a full data set. You would then further continue with it. For the second part, doing data analysis, I think ChatGPT is getting better and better in this term, and the Pro version has now this capability that you can upload data and you can ask it also to do plots. And this is, I think, a really cool tool that it is generating code in the back. So I would also trust it there more, that when you see a plot, it's also the plot on your data you're giving it. So this is really powerful.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've been using that quite a bit. And yeah, it's really impressive what you tell it, do some exploratory data analysis, and yeah, it just goes ahead and writes all these different functions and then gives you some nice plots and so on and so on.
All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time for the session today. There are some more questions in the chat, so I'll compile those and send them over to you guys, and maybe you guys can also share your responses, and we can post them in Slack. I'd like to thank you both, Joerg and Fabian, for today's very informative session on behalf of ABW. And I would like to remind everyone to please take the survey. The link is in the chat. Share your thoughts about today's session. All right. Have a great day, everyone.